question really is, how many people here have, would say they're blockchain experts? Okay. How many people here have stood up a blockchain fabric in some shape or form? Okay, very good. So what I'm going to cover today really is kind of our experience of what we're doing in blockchain. I'm going to set a little bit of context about the business usage of blockchain, why we kind of think it's interesting. I'm going to go at a reasonable pace through that. And then I'm going to talk around what we see as the use case scenarios and then what we're really doing practically in this space. I think it's always really important to understand blockchain in the context in which we all operate, right? And why companies and why businesses like yours are interested in blockchain. And for us, it's always about this idea and concept of business networks. And if you look at the way we all interoperate, we all have multiple participants in our business network, often cross geography and regulatory boundary. But that's just an example of where we're seeing those challenges emerge, and they'll continue to emerge in the future. And wealth, you know, if you look at these business networks, is about the trade of goods and services across and between those participants to build value, right? And they'll often use the terms transactions and contracts, and often we refer to these as markets, right? And there's two kinds of dominant market. There's private markets and public markets. Public markets, fruit market, car auction, we're not really, as industry, that interested. But private business networks, private markets, we understand very well, and we know how they work, and we know how to interoperate with them. And really, when you look at that world of business networks and the transfer of goods and assets, it really is those... to build value, we kind of dominantly see two asset types, physical assets and intangible assets, right? So tangible assets, things like cars, houses, diamonds, gold, antiques. And then there's also intangible assets. We break those into three constituent parts. Financial assets, bonds, securities, mortgages, well-known financial constructs. As we look to the future, we're also seeing intellectual assets. Think about patents, wills, license agreements. Think about power of attorney. Think about how we buy and sell houses in the UK. Effectively, what we do is we get a lawyer with a contract. By the way, are there any lawyers in the room? Oh, one, okay. I'll behave. I'm an engineer, just to be clear. You know, the lawyers hold the property deeds in one hand and the money in the other hand. They get on the phone with their friends. They actually agree, are we all good to trade and transact? Yes, we are. And for that, they charge us quite a lot of money. Okay? But also think about power of attorney with an ever-aging population. Think about the control of bank accounts. Think about what happens when people pass away and die. Even people with a will, with their legal affairs in good shape. It's a 6-month kind of settlement period to go through probate. And that's a really interesting kind of reflection on when you look at where we are today with technology and control. So silly, you know, intellectual assets are going to be one of the areas that blockchains can impact and influence. The other one is digital assets. You know, how many people here have got an iTunes account? You know, the reality is, you know, again, I've talked about power of attorney and death already, but let's touch on a little bit more. Be morbid on a Tuesday morning. You know, if you pass away, there's no secondary market for your digital portfolio. There's no ability to manage and control that and permission people to have access. So you start looking at our world and our lives becoming ever more digitized. How are we going to control and give rights and permissions to people to see that data and information? So think about medical records, think about our genome data, think about medical imaging information. How are we going to share that, control who views it, what, where, and when in the life cycle of that kind of engagement? So we see certainly these three sort of intangible kind of groupings as very fundamental and certainly are being all looked at as use cases and applications of blockchain. Now, cash is also an asset, but it has the property of anonymity, and there's some challenges and issues on that. So at its core, blockchain is a trusted distributed ledger across that business network, across a shared business process. Nothing more, nothing less, but it is incredibly powerful as doing that. By the way, you can all have access to these charts. There's nothing here that is not restricted. So what we would argue, if you look at that world of a distributed shared business ledger across a network, it's really a solution where we're looking at all participants in that network having a trusted, distributed, permissioned ledger. So they all have a replicated, copy of that data and information across that business network. But it is trusted because it's a private permissioned network. We know who we're transacting, who we're dealing with. Okay? An example here is we've got a number of participants, and what we would argue is participant A can see its transactions and trades with B. It can see its transactions and trades with C, but it's not permitted to see the transactions and trades between B and C. Okay? And the other thing is, people stand there and say, well, why is that? Why don't we share everything? Think about the business networks you're all operating. You're permitted to see certain things, rights, based on who you're transacting with, what, where, and when, but not everything is openly visible, permissible across the complete entity of that world. Now, there are some networks where that would be true, but not all. And then let's reflect on this. We've said this here, it's 3 participants and then an auditor on the side, so that could be 3 divisions of a company. And then you've got the auditor in the company actually, doing the regulatory oversight and view of everything that's transacted on the ledger. But imagine, instead of auditor, that's regulator. And I'd like you to think, name me an unregulated industry in Europe today. Okay? Where the regulator can see everything that's transacting and trading within that business network in near real time. Then it becomes a very powerful, very useful tool, both within companies, but also across, well-governed, well-managed, well-controlled business networks. Now, one of the things that people often confuse is Bitcoin and blockchain. And certainly, I'm giving you IBM's opinion here on this. So the way we would articulate Bitcoin as its nature is an unregulated, censorship-resistant shadow currency. We would articulate it as the first blockchain application. It was a piece of technology that was built on top of the underpinnings of blockchain. And blockchain is kind of the computer science technology that is the plumbing for that application. The challenges with it, as I said, is there's no linkage with identity, and it's very resource intensive. And certainly when we started engaging with clients a couple of years ago, so we've been looking at space for over 2 years now, blockchain for business, clients are looking, when you look at industry adoption, enterprise adoption, looking for something very different. They're looking for identity. They want strong linkage. They need to know who they're acting with. So, I touched on cash earlier. I don't know if anybody's tried buying anything large for cash recently or for large amounts of cash. It's pretty much impossible to go and buy a car for cash now. They want your debit card or your credit card or bank transfers. Because if you walk into a Mercedes dealership with £50,000 in cash, they can't actually take the cash. Because they, in turn, can't put it into the bank. Because the bank says, where did this money come from, right? Because of AML, KYC, anti-money laundering, know your client, customer. If you look at the world we all operate in, everything is based on some form of identity, permission, and understanding of who we are and what our rights are. The other thing we think is this idea of selective endorsement, right? So a lot of people talk about proof of work, crypto mining, the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And certainly if we look at the way business networks operate, that's not really the world you need to play in. If you know who you're interacting with and you know who you're transacting with, there's many more efficient and performant ways of doing endorsement of those transactions and trades. And the other thing is, certainly in the business networks, it's about assets rather than currency or cryptocurrency. People are trading goods, be it digital or physical, right? And that's what they're interested in. That's the business network. That's the business world they operate in. So as I said, we started looking at this space a couple of years ago. We started looking at all the different fabric technologies out there. By that I mean Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, credits, colored coin, you name it. We had a look at them all. And when we started interacting with clients like yourselves, there were 4 core tenets that they wanted. And I kind of bifurcate this into 2 kind of business requirements and then 2 technical requirements. So the top 2 business requirements are this idea of shared ledger, shared permission distributed ledger across that network. Also smart contracts, the ability to embed business rules and logic onto the ledger to make them queryable, searchable, derivable. Think about the ability to codify your mortgage book onto the ledger, 10-year, 15-year, 25-year mortgage, the same with bonds. So imagine being able to codify the bond onto the ledger, coupon rates, et cetera, et cetera. And then the 2 technical underpinnings that certainly clients said when they started looking at blockchain and when they wanted to deploy it, they wanted this idea of privacy. They wanted identity, but with privacy. As I said, they wanted the parties to be able to trade and know who they're trading with, but not everything to be transparent. So if you've got 3 trading parties, if I'm trading with party A and party B, I don't want party A to be like party B is getting a 5% discount, right? And they're only getting a 2% discount. And also people don't want other people to realize and understand what's being transacted and trading in that business network. So privacy is one of those kind of core tenets that companies and enterprises and business networks want. And the other one is this idea of trust. Participants want to be able to trust the contents of the ledger. Therefore, they want to have different ways of validating that ledger based on roles, permissions, and rights. So for us, this idea of trust, validation, variable endorsement levels is critical because all participants in a network are not equal. So if you look at me, John McLean, I'm not likely to participate in the bond market. I might want to buy some through a broker or a dealer, but the dealer clearly has to regulate and work with the regulator. So I may be able to transact, but I have no authorizations to drive endorsement and things like that. Okay? So really, why has blockchain sort of become quite a hot topic, right? Why is there such an interest across all different industries at the moment? And I kind of view it as it's one of these technologies that kind of has 2 real core benefits. One is this idea of saving time and reducing cost, right? So if you look at the financial world, the settlement world, think of it as the ability to do, as I said, settlement. Instead of T plus 2, T plus 30, the standard financial trade times, think about T plus 2 minutes, T plus 30 minutes. This is not a real-time trading platform. This is not microsecond trades. This is not going to replace your mobile trading platform, et cetera, et cetera. Think it as a netting settlement capability. Everything that traditionally used to do on the very long-running batch processing things, this is ability to do this in much more, near real time. Okay? So you can save time. The other thing is when you share data across a business network, you can take out intermediary steps and processes. And therefore, you can take out cost. So really, I think if it was just that, blockchain, wouldn't have the level of interest it's got. I think what's made it so interesting is it's got these 2 things: cost saving, reduction of time in that business network. But when you share data across a business network and you drive up trust, you take time, you have strong linkage with identity, you can reduce risk. And then you can start innovating around a large number of business processes that have frankly been incredibly poorly digitized. A lot of people talk about letters of credit process being a 30-day process, 28-step process, very little transparency in that network. Think about settlement in sub a day across those 28 steps in that network, where each participant has a view and control of what's transacting and happening. And we still use the same terms in the letter of credit process, letter of credit, bill of lading, from when we had the Dutch East India Company in London and the VOC in the Netherlands. It's a 400-year-old process that we've done a fairly poor job of modernizing. Right? But it doesn't just stop there. If you drive up trust and you reduce risk, you can start sort of innovating around those processes. Yeah, you can compress them, you can take time out, but you can start changing those processes quite fundamentally. Can you start playing primary, secondary market with letters of credit? Can you do partial payment based on where the goods are around the world? Because you can link this with IoT, understand where the goods are. Do you do proportional? Do you stand there and say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll take 95% on bill of lading and somebody else can carry the other 5% while it's in shipment? Take that risk. So what we're seeing now is people look at how they innovate around these different processes, not just around taking time and cost out. And what I'd stress is this is not just about the financial services. The financial services industry started this kind of drive, and they started looking at this from a basis of blockchain, of Bitcoin, should I say, and that's what really motivated the banks to start looking at this technology. They stepped very quickly from there. If you look at Cybos in Singapore in 2015, all the financial services companies were looking at blockchain. If I look at Cybos last year in Geneva, September, 40% of the clients we're dealing with, over the 400 clients we're dealing with at the moment, are non-financial services. So we're now starting to see public sector use cases about citizen, asset registry, car, land, medical applications, retail loyalty programs, supply chain programs, same with insurance, same with manufacturing. So what we're now seeing is a piece of technology that's jumped from financial services to all industries, frankly, in less than a year. And that's really quite an interesting thing to observe. Because classically, we'll develop a technology, it'll build a foothold in one industry and then propagate out. This has jumped across industry very, very quickly. And you just need to be aware of that. So what we're seeing at the moment, as I said, we're working with about 400 clients at the moment worldwide. And we're seeing kind of 4 kind of common patterns of adoption emerging in the market space at the moment. So the very simplistic one is at the bottom. Think about the ability to do a compliance ledger across a company's business network. So think about the ability to manage multi-division, cross-geography boundary. If you look at IBM, we operate in over 150 countries worldwide. How do we do financial reporting and regulatory control in that world? One of the classic use cases we did here for compliance ledger was actually with ABN AMRO in the Netherlands, wanting to control their mortgage book across different countries in Northern Europe. Okay? And this was to give them a great audit regulatory position on what their book actually looked like. Next one is the idea of a shared consortia of reference data. Okay? So if you look at any industry, insurance industry, pharmaceutical industry, automotive industry, they all use some form of, even if you look at the legal industry, they all use shared reference data across their business networks. They often have a control company or an entity they founded and formed to actually manage that data and transfer that data between participants. Think about the ability to have full compliance and view of who changed what, where, and when across the different companies that interact with that reference data and be able to propagate that in near real time rather than waiting for updates, be it once a month or once a year, whatever they decide is relevant. Another one is this idea of asset exchange. So a lot of people talk about, say, loyalty programs across different airlines or food companies, or dividend notification, voting rights, where you still got to have provenance and finality is still key. So there's some really simple use cases, but cross-company, where they're actually interacting and transacting with some form of asset. And then the last one is high-value market assets. And what we're seeing at the moment is companies starting to also play in this space. So done a certain amount of work with Japanese stock exchange around low liquidity markets where they're trading stock, 230 participants, closed group. What they want to do is drop the costs of that and then broaden participation, standard market dynamics. What we're seeing at the moment is the financial sector and companies looking at areas that are, I would say, less heavily regulated in this world. Because the regulators are still, this is a new technology, as we said, regulators are still worried about systemic risk, as they always will be with technology, and certainly in the markets we're working on here. So we're now starting to see companies look at what areas they can do that aren't heavily regulated or where they've got some form of regulatory or proven control. So one thing we've also done in this space is we've just done a piece of work with Northern Trust in the private equity space, and it was Northern Trust plus a partner in Central Europe, but also involving the Guernsey government and the Guernsey regulator. And I think that's a really encouraging sign to see that the regulators are now starting to engage and want to see where this technology is going for the future. But we just have to bear in mind regulatory timeframes. So who are the key players for blockchain adoption that we see at the moment as these client groups that we're working with? Really, the regulator is one of those people. It's not just the Northern Trust project where they were interacting with the regulator. We're seeing a number of other people using and feeding the regulator data from their ledger in near real time to bring the regulator on board with this technology. And I would say the regulator is quite encouraged and quite encouraging in this space. Industry groups. We see a number of industry groups forming, not just in the financial services space. We see lots of, be it insurance or automotive or aerospace, where they're saying, how do we transact and improve our world, our business network? And lastly, market makers, right? We're seeing a number of the market makers step forward here and say, I need to innovate and change before I am disrupted. There's a huge fear of Uberification, is the word. I don't know whether there is a word you can use, but it's the word that's been quoted to me. That, if they don't change, then change is going to be forced upon them. And some of the market makers are very uncomfortable about this. One of the things we had a debate was, when you start talking about removing intermediary steps and reducing settlement time and taking, costs out. So what are we doing as IBM in this space? And I'll touch on each of these. We're running kind of three plays, right? We're running a technology play, and I'll touch on that. We're also running a hosted and supported play, so we can offer this capability on our high security business network. We can run it on our Bluemix, platform as a service infrastructure, or we can offer you Docker images if you want to run and deploy that on-prem, if that's your desire and passion. And also, what I'm doing with my team is spending quite a lot of time of making this kind of real for clients at the moment. Both with our garage engagement, we've got a hands-on garage engagement capability up in Moorgate here in London. Also, I run them in Tokyo, Singapore, and New York. And we run an engagement model I'll just quickly touch on. So what we founded, what we helped found with 17 other companies in December 2015, we kind of had a look at this space. As I said, there were the 4 core tenets that we believed were necessary for enterprise. And the play we decided to run was collaborate with some of the early customers and enterprises that were also looking at blockchain technology. And what we founded and helped found in December 2015 was the HyperLedger project under the Linux Foundation. There's lots of open source, but it has to be under an open permissioned license. We're not in IBM fans of GPL license with very restrictive practices. For the lawyer in the room, that is quite prohibitive. If you know anything about GPL licensing, where you waive your derivative rights and work product to that foundation and group. So for us, we wanted to have a very permissive license for anybody who wanted to pick up and use and deploy this technology. So open source, open standards, but more importantly, open governance, where there's a well-understood, well-proven route for governance and management of that code and where it goes in the future. And as I said, we're one of the active members, and we are now an active framework within that project, within the HyperLedger project. So if you look at the HyperLedger project, these are the participants. We're increasing at a rate between 6 and 8 a week at the moment. Recent joiners, people like American Express and SAP joined the week before last. But as you can see here, the thing that's really encouraging for us is if you look at the community that are driving this project forward, there's a broad group of technical community, but also banks, but also interesting companies like Airbus, okay, who are a premier member, who are seeing the potential of blockchain as it could be applied to the manufacturing and aircraft industry. So it's the fastest growing Linux Foundation project ever. We're seeing great traction and interest from the industry. and we're really encouraged by the participation in this project. If you're interested in the HyperLedger project, a lot of clients say to me, well, how do I participate and play? Can you let me join? It's got nothing, you need to understand, this is a open source, open standard project on the Linux Foundation. If you're interested, you can dial in. It's every Wednesday, I believe, the architecture calls. You can dial in and listen. If you want to participate and vote and play, you have to join. Okay, so standard governance rules. It's got a standard policy for that. With that in mind, to give you a kind of outlook and view, this is a chart pulled from the HyperLedger website. This is not IBM's, roadmap chart. This is the HyperLedger project's roadmap chart. I'm just showing you this up there to give you kind of the view of how it works and how it's running. And the thing to understand is V1 is in alpha at the moment. It's GAing at the moment. And if you look at what we're working on as a community, it's all around hardening, load, interoperability, how we're going to do consumability configuration. It's all the things that our enterprise clients like yourselves are looking for, from a piece of technology they want to deploy and run in their enterprise. Other thing we're working on with the HyperLedger Fabric project is Fabric Composer. So this is all about accelerating the time to value for our client set. Think of it as a application level abstraction on top of HyperLedger Fabric that gives you the ability to rapidly develop your business solutions on top of Fabric. Again, this is being donated. It's just been accepted as an incubator project by the HyperLedger community, and it is going through that process and stepwise motion at the moment. So again, if you're interested in that, some of the guys from the team are here today, and they'd be happy probably to do a quick demo and show you that if people are interested. So lastly, engagement model. So what are we doing with clients? We're doing a lot of things around Let's Talk. A lot of clients, as you saw at the beginning, are still looking at what this is and what this is going to mean for them. But we are staging through, we've got 400 clients actually staged further than that. So we're doing a lot of blockchain hands-on labs. If you're interested in the technology, we've got a self-paced tutorial on DeveloperWorks that you can step through and play on. Certainly Composer's up there as well. Fabric Composer, if you Google that, you can find that. There's a playground environment to help you start looking at what you can do there. And what we're doing with clients is a number of first projects now. So they're hands-on. We use design thinking methodology to scope out MVP. We do initial project, deploy that into the enterprise, and then scale up and scale out. As I said, we've got over 400 of these running worldwide now, and we're seeing great traction in the marketplace. See some of the selected references. But I'd like to finish by just saying, look, blockchain is at the beginning of this journey, right? It is actually moving far quicker than even I expected when we kind of kicked this project off a couple of years ago. Clients are actually being very aggressive about what they want to do and what they want to achieve because they see the potential for it to transform their business. The other thing to realize, this is not just a financial services play, right? When you see government agencies looking at this in anger and serious projects in this space, you realize that it's really moving very, very quickly when you compare it to a number of other technologies I've worked with in the past. With that, hope you have a fantastic day. Really enjoy it. If you've got any questions, some of the technical team at the back from mine, and I'm sure Bob can connect you if you've got any questions about HyperLedger Fabric and where we're going with that community. Thanks for your time today.